All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Pop Ed webinar on teaching the human dimensions of climate change. Tonight, we are going to be sharing several lessons on this topic, and we're going to be engaging and interacting with each other and interacting with the lessons, and just kind of looking at the complexities of climate change and thinking about ways that we can teach about this topic with our students in our classrooms and beyond. And I am joined by a wonderful Pop Ed trainer, Linda DeChambeau, and I'm going to let her share a little bit more about her experience and the work that she's done around climate change. So, Linda, if you'll introduce yourself.
Hey, everybody. I'm happy to be joining you. I'm a volunteer with Pop Ed now for 20 years, and that's something all of you will have an opportunity to do as well, actually. But I think you're going to find today really interesting. I've got more than 40 years of experience as an environmental scientist and an educator, and half of that career I spent in the lab telling everybody what pollution I could see and find in the laboratory, in our water and our air. But I spent the second half doing something about it. I'm a retiree from the US EPA, the federal government. Found that process pretty burdensome, and so I got pretty involved in local politics. I actually ran and I was the mayor of my city, my town, and all the while looking at environmental education and science, and found that also a slow and tedious process. And just really and then I did some nonprofit work. I still do nonprofit work. And but the reason I'm telling you all this is the message through all of this, everything that I did, whether I was at the federal government at EPA, whether I was a mayor of my town, whether I was working for a nonprofit collecting petitions, I truly, truly have always woven in education into what we do, whether I'm educating, executive officials. And I'm so grateful for all of you showing up today. I think what you do, I think teaching education on the topic of climate and how it intertwines with every aspect of our lives. We're in a climate crisis, and that is something that's not to be disputed. But just thank you for showing up today. Thank you for doing this, and thank you for taking this into your classrooms. I think you're going to have a lot of fun today.
Thank you so much, Linda. And a lot of you have seen me before and seen my emails, but I'm the online learning manager for Pop Ed. And if you're not familiar with Pop Ed, just a little background about us. We provide quality training like this one. We also do in-person trainings, and we create a lot of lesson plans and resources to help teachers cover population topics in the classroom. And here's just a little bit of what our workshops look like. We try to make them as engaging as possible. So we have a lot of digital tools when we're doing these webinars that we'll be interacting with today. And then when we're in person, we also have a lot of props and things to have students engage with the content and really think about these concepts. And then these are just some of the population topics that are covered in our content. There's a lot of different subtopics that population covers. So you can see some of the environmental and then also the societal topics that may be covered today, and then in the lessons that you'll be getting at the end of this session. And at the end of this webinar, you're going to receive access to our teaching population online curriculum. So you'll get the 3 lessons that we'll be showcasing tonight, and then an additional 57. And then you'll also have access to the virtual adaptations that we'll be showing you, student readings, infographics, and so much more. All right, so if everyone's ready, we're going to get started with our first activity. And this first activity is actually a demonstration. So you get to sit back a little bit. If you just ended school, you can sit back and watch as we do a demonstration. So this one is called Code Blue. And we're going to be actually doing this together. Linda's going to help me out, and she's going to read the story. And as she's reading the story, I'm going to act as the students and actually manipulate our little ocean model. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for a second. And I'm going to have you, it might be helpful to pin me on your screen so that you can see our ocean right here. So we've got our ocean. And as Linda is reading the story, I am going to be doing different things with the ocean. So normally what we would do is we would have our students be characters, and we would either give them some little containers that have materials in it, or they would have one of these cards that then they would be removing and interacting with our ocean up here. But I'm going to be doing all of that as Linda is reading the story. And as we're reading the story, we may be asking some questions, so please feel free to answer in the chat. And then we're going to kind of debrief at the end as well. So Linda, if you want to start off.
Okay, so this is how you would do it in your classroom. You'd be reading this and your students would be coming up one by one. So I'll just go out here and I'm going to tell you the story, Code Blue. Throughout humans' existence on Earth, we have made our home on the coast of the ocean, depending on its resources for food and transportation. Our ocean makes up 70% of the Earth's surfaces, making it the primary reservoir of water on our Earth's surface. It is the largest of the 3 marine biomes. It is teeming with wildlife, and it is responsible for much of our climate patterns. So we want you to imagine that this container of water that Barbara is holding represents the ocean 500 years ago. And we can add some salt to it. And basically, when our world population was 500 million, or about 1/16, that's 1/16 of what it is now, the oceans were filled with a diverse ecosystem of corals, invertebrates, fish, and mammals, all relying on each other in interconnected food webs. However, the ocean has changed a whole lot since 1500, and this is a story of those changes. So 100 years passed by and people turned to the ocean as a resource to improve their lives. During this age of discovery, the popularity of ocean transit exploded. People and goods embarked on ambitious new ocean trade routes that interconnected Europe, Africa, and Asia. Additionally, people began to recognize the ocean's wealth as harvestable. Though people had been hunting whales for thousands of years, there were new technologies like faster ships and larger harpoons, and what was called commercial whaling became more and more lucrative in Europe and North America, and whale blubber was converted to lamp oil, and whale bone was used in ladies' corsets, to a number of other things. By the mid-1700s, it actually became difficult to find whales near the Atlantic coast, and this was leading fleets to expand their hunting to other parts of the globe, decimating the whale populations worldwide now. Currently, there is an international moratorium on commercial whaling. However, countries such as Norway, Iceland, and Japan are continuing this practice. In the early 1800s now, where the world population is now 1 billion people, and scientists and farmers are looking for all kinds of ways to increase ways to make our crop yields and to feed the population. And we began creating chemical fertilizers. Those have high levels of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And nitrogen is very soluble, especially when used in large amounts. And they run right off of our agricultural land into large bodies of water. This in turn increases nutrients pollution in the ocean. It'll cause algal blooms. Those consume lots of oxygen in the area and can create a dead zone in our ocean where no other organisms can live. Dead zones occur in many areas, including the east coast of the US and the Gulf of Mexico, which has the 2nd largest dead zone in the world. Worldwide, there are now some 700 coastal dead zones. 700 dead zones. However, the small amounts of chemical fertilizers used in the 1800s just weren't enough to cause these troubles, and people were never even anticipated how widespread that their use was going to become as it is now, and the large quantities that we're using and how they're harming our marine ecosystems. And along comes the Industrial Revolution. In the mid-19th century, we ushered in a whole new era of technologies, and that jump-started a fossil fuel-based economy and coal. Coal was the new main energy supplier, and coal caused a large amount of air pollution. Burning coal was also a source of mercury poisoning, all of that getting into our ocean system. Trace amounts of mercury are found in coal, and they're released as the coal is burned, and that moves into the atmosphere and right into our oceans. In turn, the fish ingest the mercury, and the humans become susceptible to illness because we're eating the fish, and the fish have the high mercury content.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Linda. So we're I just wanted to point out, so every clothespin is going to represent 500 million people. So we're also marking the human population changing as we're going through this story. So Linda, if you want to continue on to the next page, in the early 1900s.
So in the early 1900s, voila, the first offshore oil wells were installed off the coast of California, trying to keep up with our growing demand for energy and oil. And these early wells were dug very close to the shoreline. They blackened the beaches, and they didn't even produce that much oil. The first major oil spill in California was in 1910, and it dumped almost 400 million gallons of oil into the Pacific, clearly devastating the ecosystem. 1930, 20 years later, we're at a population of 2 billion people. And oil companies are instructing more and more platforms all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. And today there are over 1,300 offshore oil rigs around the world. And one of the largest spills occurred when we had that rig explosion back in 2010. Some of you may remember it took nearly 3 months to stop the flow of oil that was going into the Gulf of Mexico, which just devastated the environment and the whole economy and the whole community down there. Back to 1950. So in the 1950s, much of the maritime technology that was developed in World War II was now converted into some amazing fishing technologies. So here we have 3 billion people on the planet now, and we're trying to feed them. And we've got new technologies, but they're causing severe overfishing, because now fishermen can catch thousands of pounds of fish in just one outing. With these new technologies, including troweling, which is dragging a net along the ground and scrapes the sea floor, so you start catching anything and everything along the way. And this bycatch, it's called, or the accidental catch of marine life, is becoming quite a problem for turtles and dolphins, and all sorts of other fish are being caught and killed and tangled up in the fishing gear that was actually meant for just catching food for us. And then these abandoned nets. So we've got fishing lines and traps and abandoned nets, and those are all starting to continue to hang out and kill animals, even weeks after the fishermen went out to try to retrieve them and do the work. In fact, in 2017, 2/3 of the world's fisheries were being fished at their maximum sustainable level, and 1/3 are being overfished, basically depleting our fishing stock. The cod fishery in the northeastern United States and Canada has recorded some of the highest catches in the 1960s, but that has collapsed because of overfishing. So here we have, even with the fishing boom, that we're not even producing enough fish to provide for our population. We move into the 1970s when the world population is now 4 billion. And what we have now is aquaculture, or the raising of fish, basically farming in pens, as much as we would do like with cows or chickens. That became a growing industry, especially in Asian countries such as Indonesia and Thailand. In many rural areas, the coastal ecosystems were just decimated as these fish farmers were clearing mangrove forests to set up more room for these aquaculture, for these pens, for these fishing farms. And then these mangroves were being destroyed, and yet they were home to hundreds of species of birds and fish. And here we are converting them into large feeding pens for shrimp and salmon. So we've got the density of which the fish are grown, but many of them also now required quantities of antibiotics. Because we've got all these fish all stuck together in tight places, we need to stop the spread of disease. And unfortunately, these antibiotics then move and seep back into the ocean and pollute our water, in turn endangering our public health and ourselves as our food sources. On to 1987. World population is now 5 billion people, who are together producing millions of pounds of trash. And this litter from our land and from our ships and our cruise vessels goes straight into the ocean system. And here we have ocean pollution. By 1997, we've got the population nearing 6 billion people. And scientists are starting to find out about these plastic gyres we see in the Atlantic Ocean and Pacific Ocean that you've probably seen about. There's these giant massing swirls and mounds of plastics, all created by water currents, all in our ocean. And all these toxic substances are seeping into the water. And unfortunately, the marine birds are often choking on or consuming or getting tangled up in the plastic. And litter isn't the only problem that we have to worry about in humans. All countries, we have sewage, we have waste, and we've got sewage coming out from all of our households, from our cities, from our businesses. And in most cases, especially in third world countries, those are running directly into our ocean. So we're recognizing the global nature of the problem that we have in the oceans and what they're facing. We've got international bodies that are trying to be created worldwide to how can we monitor pollution and the climate and fishing industries? How can we set up rules? But it's still very difficult. It's very hard to get countries to agree on an action plan, and it's hard to enforce. And a lot of countries simply don't comply with the agreements. So here we are with a world population of 7 billion people in 2011. We've got all these impacts on the ocean we're accumulating. That water's getting pretty dirty there that Barbara's holding. We've got all this increased concentration now of carbon dioxide, CO2, our greenhouse gases from burning oil and coal. And all that's going right in, and that is affecting our oceans, and our sea level is rising. Low-lying countries such as Bangladesh, Papua New Guinea, and some of the islands, the Maldives, are already starting to evacuate. And we know this is a permanent sea level rise. So communities are in transition. And as more CO2 is being absorbed by the ocean water, the pH level of the water is going down, and that causes ocean acidification. Many organisms can't handle a lower pH. They have a very narrow range of pH that they can maintain. And this acidification is making it very difficult. And our coral reefs are no longer growing. They're dead, and they can't form their shells. And the diversity that relies on that coral is also dying. Both the coral reefs now and the mangrove forests that we talked about earlier are natural buffer zones against storms. So guess what? We've got an increase in global temperature. Storms like hurricanes are increasing in intensity, and we don't have the natural protective structures we need. So natural disasters are starting to occur more frequently, wiping out towns and actually washing them into the water. So here we have mangrove forests that were a carbon sink that were able to sequester or soak up carbon dioxide. And without them, the cycle of this global warming and ocean acidification just continues. So here we are pretty much today, and we are at 8 billion people. Our cumulative activities are threatening our ocean's health, and all that it provides to us in the global ecosystem. Our oceans are essential for our nutrition, transportation, recreation, but mostly for keeping the earth habitable and for humankind to regulate temperatures, atmospheric moisture, and storing carbon. The United Nations has recognized the need for protecting our ocean health and has added the goal, quote, to conserve and sustainably use the world's oceans, seas, and marine resources. They have that in their sustainable development goals, and the goal is to ensure healthy oceans exist for our generations to come. It is essential for all our countries to work together to achieve this goal.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Linda. So we can see that our ocean has changed quite a bit over time. And I'm just going to show you, this is a really great visual for students to get an idea of, how humans have altered our ocean ecosystems. And I want to show you that all the things that we used in this simulation are things that you can get from the grocery store, and just like little, they're non-toxic and well, they're easy for your students to be able to use. So these are your instructions in the lesson plan will include the ingredients that will go in each of the containers. And then the lesson plan also includes like the cards for students, so they'll know when their storyline is being called, and then they can remove the card on the ocean itself. And I wanted to talk about a couple of questions So there's many discussion questions with all the lessons, but I wanted to look at first, just how did the increasing population have an effect on the ocean? So if you want to share in the chat, what are some ways that the increasing population might have impacted the ocean? I see increased fishing, ooh, change in acidity, habitats were being destroyed, right? The ocean started getting less and less clean, right? You could see more things actually in the ocean. So we're seeing like a lot of different types of pollution that are happening. And were all of these impacts human caused? Dead zones from fertilizers, great. Does anyone have an idea, were all of them human caused or were some caused by other things? Yeah, right. Natural disasters are not human caused, but I'm going to have we all think about this next question. How could climate change have altered this ecosystem over time? So there were many different types of pollutants that were introduced in this story, but there were also some things specific to climate change. So what were some of those climate change specific ways that our ocean had changed? Great, right? Increased ocean temperatures. Awesome. There's more natural disasters because of climate change. We had the melting of the ice caps that led to sea level rise, that reduced pH, right? Because the ocean's absorbing more of that CO2. Awesome. And then the intensity of natural disasters is increased because of climate change. And so this is a great way to illustrate to your students some of the cause and effect relationships with climate change, with humans and pollution in general, but kind of just intro this topic. Any questions on this activity before we go to our next one, where Linda's really going to dive into some of those relationships a little further? No? All right, so I'm going to kick it over to Linda. So this lesson is really great for high school students, but you could also use it in a middle school class. We do have other versions. We have Who Polluted the Potomac, which is specific to a river, which is great for grades 3 to 8. And then we also have an elementary or a lower elementary version as well that works really well, kind of getting into similar concepts, but not as big as the ocean. All right.
Thank you. I love that workshop. It just goes on the number of topics we could talk about, and it's can apply to so many different number of your classrooms. So this one, people and climate change, the data is in. This is a new one to me. I found it very interesting as a scientist from EPA. What we have an opportunity to do with your students is you're going to act as the students today. We're going to break you into groups, and we're going to give you different forms of data. Data can actually be everything from photographs to graphs, graphic representation to scientifically gathered data, whether it's something I did when I was in the lab or something I took a photo on my 2 trips up to Alaska. And what we're going to ask you to do is get into these groups, look at these different types of data, and try to identify what they are, take a look at them, and identify relationships also between the growth of people, of population, greenhouse gas emissions, temperature rise, land ice melt, and sea level rise. So the first thing we're going to do is ask you to analyze the data. So we'll break you into groups, and we'll ask you to read your group's data. And each group will be assigned a set, in this case, of slides of data that you'll be looking at. And we're going to ask you to look at and answer some questions and do some critical thinking. And we're going to ask you to look for connections that link the data to a theme. And we're going to do this together. We've developed some digital tools where we'll actually be able to go out into groups. And here's some examples first of some of the data that we've prepared for you that you'll have to look at in your groups. You'll see some of them are graphs. looking at sea level rise. You'll see some are articles about what's going on with birds, look at pie charts, look at different photographs, as I mentioned. So there's students that you'll have all this different information. We're going to break you out into a room, and we're going to break you, and each group will have your own files to look at. So each group will review your data bank items and will ask you to answer the analysis questions that are developed on these slides. So all of you will have a group, all of you will have slides, and all of you will have data to look at. We want you to decide what theme connects all of your data bank items together. And then I want each of you, before you come back into the room or right when you get started, figure who's going to be your spokesperson. So we're going to have you come back into the room and pick a rep, and we'll call on someone when you get back. But right now, let's go to access the digital tools, and I'll show you a little bit about what we're doing. So Barbara's got the link for you in the chat, and I ask all of you to join me over here with this digital tool. And the first slide shows the instructions that we have for you. And you'll see that they're listed on the left, group 1, 2, 3, and 4. Go ahead and list your names in there. So we'll break you into groups. And then what you'll do is each group, not slide number, but data bank number, you'll see that each of these are interactive. So for example, if I'm in group 1, and I'd list my name here, and the first, I have 4 pieces of data to look at, and then I have a space here to explain what I'm seeing, how are they connected. So each one is already interactive in your digital tool. You can highlight, for example, database item number 1. It'll take you right to the slide that you need. And what you do together as a group is walk through these steps, go ahead and answer these questions together as a group, and then you can come back. You can see up in the upper right-hand corner, you'll all have the opportunity to come back again. So, and then go back to the beginning of the slide. So each of your groups will be doing this. All of these are interactive, like Andrew's in group 3. If he wants to look at slide 11 and our database 11, and on it goes. You'll see that some of them are more than one part. So this is part 1, 2, and 3. So work together as a team, answer those questions, go back to your slide and take the others. So I hope that's clear, and we're going to let you all spend some time in your group. What are we giving them? 10 minutes?
So I was thinking like 8 minutes in your
8 minutes?
breakout. And what we're going to do is I'm going to break you out into 4 groups. So technically breakout room 1 will be group 1. Breakout room 2 will do group 2's stuff, so that you're all talking about the same points. And then breakout room 3 will be group 3, breakout room 4, group 4. And while you're in your breakouts, you also want to think about the theme. Like there's a theme between all of your data points. You want to think about what that theme might be, and then you can put it on that right-hand side there as what you think your theme might be from your graphs and charts and articles. So I'm going to open up all the rooms, and then you can join your breakout room. And we'll see you in a little bit.
What I'd like to do is go ahead, and if I could start with group 1. Could somebody from group 1 tell us, let's talk briefly, 1 minute. What causative relationships did your group find in breakout 1? What did you find was your theme in breakout 1? Anyone want to unmute and tell me?
I can do it. So in group 1, our data was centered around greenhouse gases for the first 2 items, and then the second 2 items were showing population growth and population density. So the overall theme that we identified was making a connection between changes in greenhouse gas emissions and changes in population.
And group 2, what was your breakout room theme? Don't be shy.
Okay, I'll take this. I figured one of the biggest themes is climate change, leading to necessary adaptations in animals and mammals.
The change in the animals, it was in your data.
Yeah, like there's an article on shape shifting in which they talk about how birds, for example, are beginning to basically get to adapt to, you know, changing temperatures and changing climates by getting like bigger beaks and legs.
Okay, great. If we have more time, we can get into the different details of, you know, what theme and how the theme builds with more data. How about those of you in breakout room 3? What did you discuss as possible themes?
We
Go ahead.
discussed that our theme was how much more intense the effect was of global climate change in polar regions and ecosystems. And we looked at a current case of this record amount of rainfall that happened in Greenland, and how that was the first rainfall at the summit of the peaks in since 1950, and how that's really changing the environment from where things that were solid are now liquid, and that's going to impact the rest of ecosystems. And then we also looked at a photograph of a glacier that's almost no more, with the same consequences. So overall, global climate change is impacting polar environments at a very rapid rate.
And how about group 4? Quickly, 1 minute, anyone got an idea on what you guys peaked at?
I can jump in. We looked at sea level rise and trends. So the graphs and pictures were from different locations around the world, and also featured some of the human impacts that are a result of sea level rise.
Well, since we only gave you 8 minutes to be scientists, I'd say you guys did a pretty good job. In your classroom, clearly you'd give them more opportunity, more data to go through this and take a look and come to summaries. And basically, sort of in this order, group 1, 2, 3, 4, the population growth and greenhouse gases, the temperature rise, the land ice melt, and sea level rise. A lot of time could be spent talking about which one causes what versus what drives the other, and a great opportunity to really look at data and how you can analyze it. There's alternative instructions when you do this in your classroom. You could have all 14 pieces of data all up in the room, and each group or each team could go up, take something and take it back. It could be you know, mixed in with other points of data, but there's a lot of different ways that this can be handled, and all of that's described in your lesson plans. I think that was kind of just a really brief overview, but I'll let Barbara go ahead, and we're getting a lot of information out to you today to go ahead and jump into our last lesson plan, which is very detailed.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Linda. So people and climate change is really great for a middle school lesson, but it also could work really well in high school. And it's helpful if students have some knowledge about climate change. So, you know, if you want to intro that lesson with something like Code Blue, you know, with that story, and kind of build in some climate change in there, and then kind of go from there. Our next lesson is called Carbon Crunch. And this lesson really has students diving deep into like who is driving carbon dioxide emissions that contribute to climate change, who's most impacted by climate change, and then also who should be responsible for adjusting to and coping to a new climate change reality. So there's a lot of content in this lesson. Today, we're going to just kind of go through what the lesson entails. We might do a little bit of the digital tool, but then unfortunately, we'll not be able to do the whole lesson together. So the lesson plan starts off with having students looking at carbon dioxide emissions from the past. And we actually use our World Population History website, so our sister site, to have students navigate this. So if you haven't seen this website, it's really awesome for a lot of different reasons. And I'm going to put the link in the chat in case you want to kind of play along with the map with me as I do this. But the first thing that students can do is look at just how we've changed the way that we use energy over time. And you can see these little like markers down here, and you can see science and technology, environment, people and society, health, and food and agriculture. And there's all these little dots as we move through history that give some information of what's happening during that time. So what they'll start noticing is that as we, get closer to the Industrial Revolution, we're using more and more, right? We're going to start using fossil fuels, and then that continues on. Then the next part is looking at just CO2 emissions over time from that Industrial Revolution. And we have these great overlays. And so we actually have a CO2 overlay that you can see how CO2 emissions have changed globally over time. So I am going to do a couple of things. I'm going to remove the population dots for right now, just because it's a little hard to see sometimes with them on. And I'm going to remove the milestones. And I just want you to see first, where do the CO2 emissions first pop up? So you're going to start seeing some of this red color showing up on the map. So I'm just going to drag this so I can move it slowly. So do you see where we're first seeing CO2 emissions? And you can even hover over the country and see that in the United Kingdom. And then as I continue further, you're going to see more and more places as they industrialize, right, are emitting more and more CO2. You'll notice that the US is the first one that is that darker red color. And then as we get into, and it goes up until about, I think 2000, let's see, 2017. So we have data up until 2017, and you can hover and have students kind of compare between time and see the CO2 emissions that have happened. So that's the first part of the lesson, really giving them that solid foundation and having them dive into some data. And then as all of our lessons, we actually have them do something active as well. So we're going to have them do a simulation looking at those carbon emissions of the present. And we have students represent different countries around the world and create a visual of how much carbon dioxide per person that country emits. So here's an example of one of the cards that students would be holding. We usually pair students up where we have one student holding the card and then one student actually creating the amount of carbon using either Legos or these little like blocks over here. So for example, Argentina releases about 4.7 metric tons of CO2 per person. So you would have one person holding Argentina's card and one person holding something with 9 cubes to represent the amount of carbon. So you can see here's an example here. And what we would then have students do is line up from the lowest emitters of CO2 to the highest emitters of CO2 and have them hold up their country cards and then also hold up their blocks so they can see the visual there as well, and then see all the country names. And what works really well is if you have students stand in a U shape so that they can see everyone. If you're standing in a line, it's really hard for them to see. So a U shape's really good for this activity. Okay, so since we're not in person, we're gonna once again try to do this digitally. So I'm gonna put a digital tool in the chat. And so if you'll go ahead and click on that tool, and you should see something that looks like this, where you have Carbon Crunch. I see some of you joining. And what we would do is we would assign students a country, but tonight, if you'll just pop over to slide 2, and if I could get 14 volunteers to pick a country on this slide. So if you want to just type your name in to claim one of these 14 countries. And you can just type your first name or your initials. You don't have to type your full name. And then once you claim your country, if you click on the link, it's going to open into a new tab and you'll see your data card. So it's just like in person where the student would have a physical data card that you can print off. On the digital tool, you'll have a digital data card. So I need a few more volunteers. And so this works really well if you have a class of 28, because then you can have students work in pairs. You can always have, some students will have less blocks, so it's easier to carry and double up if you have a smaller class. And then if you have a larger class, you can always have, add additional countries to this activity. Okay, so I've got 2 more countries. So if we could have 2 more volunteers, 1 more volunteer, if someone could take Kenya. And then as we're going to the next slide, if everyone will pop over to slide 3, what we're going to do is we're going to do a virtual representation of that line of students going from lowest to highest. So if you'll take your, whichever your country is, and if you'll move it somewhere on the line, and we may have to stack a little bit and rearrange to show the lowest emitters of CO2 to the highest. So we have blocks in the center, little squares in the center representing the amount of CO2. And then if you see these stacks, that's 10 blocks. So those are stacks of 10 blocks or 5 metric tons of CO2 in those, just to make it easier to carry and to do the math. And so as you're moving those, I want you to look at if you're noticing any relationships or anything that you're seeing between the amount of CO2 that countries are emitting worldwide. Is it uniform? No, right? It's definitely not uniform. You can see that per person, it varies by country. And then you might also see, you might also notice that the circles are colors, and the actual cards that students would hold are different colors, and they're the same colors on these circles as they would be in the lesson plan. What do you think the colors represent here? Does anyone have an idea of what those colors might represent?
Could it be a stage in demographic transition?
Ooh, good. It could be. It's actually not. Does anyone have any other ideas but that could contribute to that? I see economy, right? So it's actually income or wealth level, and these are based on the World Bank classification. So green is high income, blue is upper or middle income, and orange is lower middle income, and then red is low income. So what is the relationship between, can you see any relationships between income and wealth and the amount of carbon dioxide that's emitted per person here?
More income means more emissions.
Yeah, right. So we're seeing generally here that the more wealth that a country has, the more CO2 that's being emitted per person. Okay, so after that part, students would answer some discussion questions, and so we just answered some of them here. And then the next part of the activity has students thinking about who's impacted by climate change. And so they're going to look at some of the data points that are on the back of their card. Physically on the digital tool, they're all together on their card. And they're going to think about climate vulnerability. So what extent might climate change damage or harm a system? And there's 4 main areas that they'll be looking at. So they'll be looking at extreme weather, sea level rise, agricultural productivity loss, and then they're going to look at the overall risk that a country has for these climate change impacts. And the numbers on the card mean that they're the 8th most, or that's the number that they're at risk for that particular issue. So number 8 would mean they're the 8th most at risk. So like Argentina here would be 39 most at risk out of 167 countries for extreme weather. And what they would do is in class, we would actually have them stand up if they're in the top 80 most at risk for these different things. For our digital tool, and I'm just going to pop over to it, we would have them move their country over into this spot here, into the box, if they're at the top 80 at risk. Because I knew that this lesson's really rich, I already moved them for us. So you can check my data and make sure I did that correctly. But if you were at the top 80 most at risk countries, for severe weather, you have been moved into this green box. And you can see 2 countries that were not in that top 80. And then looking at sea level rise, you can see the top 80 most at risk countries for sea level rise. And then we have agricultural productivity loss. And those are the countries that are at the most risk for agricultural productivity loss. And then you can do overall risk. And that's just the combination of all of them. We're going to actually skip that one. And I just want us to think about which countries were in the top 80 at risk more often. Did anyone notice any trends? Was there any country that didn't go into the top 80 ever?
Germany.
I mean, generally, third world countries are more at risk for all these things, or most of these things.
Yeah, so we're seeing the countries that have lower wealth or income tend to be a lot of times moving into these areas. But we're noticing that no country is not really, every country has some kind of risk, right? Germany didn't reach the top 80, but I think when we look at the data, Germany still is like right there. It's at 81 for sea level rise. So it still has a risk with climate change, right? So just kind of thinking about that, all countries and everyone's has some kind of risk with climate change. Now, the next part of the activity has students think about, and I'm going to click out of here for a second. Has students think about, an adjusted risk. So could they cope with climate change? And would they have the funds to do so? And if you're on your data card, if you can move your country into the green box, if you're in the top 80 for the last data point, the adjusted overall risk. So like Argentina is 122 out of 167, so I would not move Argentina. So if you're in the top 80, go ahead and move your country over. Okay, so now we can see here a little bit clearer that a lot of the countries that are emitting the least amount of CO2 here are also the most at risk, right, for the impacts of climate change. And you can see also based on the wealth, and they're also releasing the least per capita. One of the other questions that's in this activity is thinking about is, we know like how much carbon dioxide per person, right? But do we know who is emitting the most CO2 as a country based on this data?
Kuwait.
So Kuwait has the most per person, but we would need one other data point to figure out who's releasing the most as a country. And what's that data point?
How many people in their country?
Yeah, so how many people are in the country as well? So it's important to point that out as well. So these are all per capita, but then we could also look at per country and based on that population number. Okay. And then at the end of this activity, and you can actually do this in a variety of different ways, but you have students read about the global carbon budget and really think about, we only have a certain amount of carbon dioxide that we can release to stay under that 2 degrees of planetary warming. And we've already released more than half of this budget. So who should be allowed to emit the remaining half? Who increases their carbon emissions, right? Who decreases? This is where you could bring in that demographic transition model and kind of think about where countries are, and their right to industrialize as well, and kind of have that discussion with your students and that social justice aspect as well. Any questions on that activity? Okay. All right, so today we went through 3 lessons. You saw a demonstration in the beginning, and you got to dive into some data within your group. And then you saw kind of a really rich lesson that we covered in a quick amount of time this evening with Carbon Crunch. So I want to make sure that you have access to all of these lessons. So all of them are available on our teaching population curriculum. So I'm going to put that link to our curriculum in the tab in the chat. And so if you click on that, you will have access, you can get access to this curriculum, and you can see, you can search by lessons by title, by subject, by theme. And when you go to any of those lessons, so I'm going to go back here. And if I clicked on Carbon Crunch, you can download the lesson plan. It'll tell you all the details of like what subjects it's good for, how much time it might take. Here's all the links like about the carbon emissions from past and present, with some instructions on some questions that you could ask students. And then as you scroll down, it's going to have all of the other resources like student worksheets, and then all of those country cards. So they're all available within the lesson plan. If you like the idea of a digital tool, because you're trying to save paper, or you just want to try the digital tool or use it, you have access to that too. So it's all right there within that curriculum. So you can explore that tool and make a copy and adjust it as you would like for your class as well. And then you can also connect to your state standards. So if you click on here, you can connect and see how this curriculum or any lesson plan might connect to your state standards. So I'm actually going to just look up Carbon Crunch. And then I would click on teaching population. I'm just going to say science, since I used to teach science, and I'm going to click on 9th grade, and I'm going to click search. And then what it will do is it'll ask me what state I'm in. So I will say Virginia, and I'm going to say, and then it will tell you the standards that it connects, this specific lesson. And you can look it up based on the entire curriculum as well, based on your state that you're in. And then just a couple other things. This is the link to the World Population History site. We also have a student contest where we have climate migration as one of our topics. So I'm going to go to that, and you can see climate migration is one of our topics this year. So it's a great way to get students involved in creating videos on topics that they're passionate about. And we have a lot of research and resource materials for them around this topic. And I'm going to put the link to the presentation in the chat. So let me put that in there so you have access to all of these links. And I'm also going to email everyone everything after this tomorrow. Probably you'll get all of these resources as well. And then there's many different ways you can connect with PopEd if you want to be a trainer like Linda. There's ways that you can work with us. And then also we have a lot of other opportunities to be engaged with PopEd. And then finally, we have an evaluation if you have a couple minutes to let us know how this webinar was, and including the lesson plans that we shared. Just put that link in the chat. And then you can also scan the QR code. And I just want to thank you all so much for being with us today. Linda, did you want to say anything else as we wrap up?
No, thanks for sticking with us and a lot of information. Please dive in and check it out. I'm glad to see in the chat that some of you are already using it.
Well, thank you so much. And
Thank you.